Hi, Year 12. Just going to go through a few things that we didn't get through in class, but you're going to need to know for what you're going to do on Tuesday in class when we're doing some writing work. Okay, so when we've looked at the poem Lovesong of J. Alfred Prufrock, we've gone through it line by line and annotated, looked at some of the language features, the techniques, and discussed what exactly is going on with the ambiguity of the poem. The other thing that you were required to do in this module is look at other people's research into it. So critical responses, do your own research, and look at how those particular um, responses could in fact impact your own. So one of the articles that you have is by Edward Lobb, and it's about the ellipsis, just the ellipsis in the poem. And what I thought I'd do is go through some of the things that he argues and talk about it, because I actually found his writing quite interesting with what he was saying. So in his article about the ellipsis, he discusses that the ellipsis is undumbrate the grand ellipsis of the overwhelming question and clarify both by implication and exclusion what that question is. So the very use of the ellipsis gives us an idea about what the overwhelming question could be. He also goes on to say that it only appears a few times in the poem. I've got it here twice, but it actually appears a couple more times than that. But it's replicated in the metaphors and similes. So he talks about the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table. Like that in itself is this long pause. Um, and then he also says that on the other hand, we have to work hard to find the connection. So that the statement itself, the simile, is acting as an ellipsis, a pause in thought between the first idea about let us go, then you and I, and then what's to come with the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. Lobb also states that many of Eliot's contemporary critics stated Eliot was writing nonsense and did not see that this line is a modernist use of pathetic fallacy. So what Lobb is arguing is that because Eliot is a modernist poet, the saying that the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table is a specific use of pathetic fallacy. And so he argues that Eliot is actually imposing qualities onto a scene that does not really exist. We don't literally see patients etherized on a table set out against the sky or in the gritty part of the city that the poem takes place in. He goes on and says, both are sick, both are anaesthetised in one way or another to escape pain, both are mentally isolated, one in literal unconsciousness, the other in a dreamlike sequence of pictures from the unconscious. Both are, for different reasons, passive, radically vulnerable, and unable to communicate. So here he's talking about the two parts of Prufrock. He argues that he would not necessarily speaking to a woman, but even if we are speaking to a woman or a beloved or whoever the other is, the you and me, both the you and the me are anaesthetized in some way or other. And we have the patient who is literally unconscious, and then the other is in this dreamlike sequence that plays out when we get the fog cat moving into it. So when we go down a couple of stanzas, the fog cat also emphasizes that metaphor for the alienation and unconsciousness, or the idea of sleep. And that is further echoed in the lines where he alludes to John the Baptist and the severed head. He says his bald head comes out on a platter, and also in the lines where he's pinned to the wall, wriggling, and also to the scuttling crab with the ragged claws. So all of it creates an alienation, an idea of alienation, and even perhaps vulnerability, as Lobb argues. Um, we can go on from there. This is still working with the Lobb piece. He says that Dante, Michelangelo, John the Baptist, Lazarus, Hamlet are all associated with philosophical narratives, and then those narratives themselves are becoming philosophical, and so we can put a philosophical interpretation onto Prufrock. He suggests that the overwhelming question is about God, the existence of God, the meaning of life, and about women and sex. So in class, we've talked about how the overwhelming question could be about any of those, but we're not sure which one, which is part of the ambiguity, but Lobb actually argues is about all of them at once. And he's suggesting that the two unsaid questions of the poem that we don't actually get to say, and we know that Prufrock can't. He actually says that he can't say it. It's not what I mean. It's but what Lobb suggests is that those two questions are: can I actually ask a woman on a date, and what is the meaning of life? And that's really the overwhelming question. Then from there we have to ask: is this comic? Is it ironic? What's the purpose of this? And so Lobb states that sex and metaphysics are it's late at night, analogous in the poem, while analogies typically clarify this one remains opaque until we find the missing link between them, and, as with the opening simile, that link is Prufrock's consciousness. So he's saying that they're inexplicably linked together, and that to be able to find the difference between them and find the connection between them, we have to look at the idea that this is actually about Prufrock's consciousness. Critical reception of the poem. So when we're writing about the poem, we have to actually, or any of the poems, we have to actually talk about critical reception, because that leads to enduring value, and that's one of the components of Module B. The poem itself was received a lot of criticism at the time that it was published, and it was rejected many, many times before it was published. We've talked about that in class. Ezra Pound had to fight a battle for 6 months in order to convince Harriet Monroe to publish the poem in her magazine Poetry. It was Pound that insisted the poem be published in its original form. Eliot had actually been asked to remove the reference to Hamlet from it. And Today, though, it's considered one of Eliot's greatest poems alongside The Wasteland and Four Quartets. So that's interesting in that it's valued more now than what it was when it was first published. So it first appeared in 1915, and then again in Prufrock and Other Observations in 1917, which was Eliot's own anthology. Today, in our time, we consider Eliot to be one of the most important modernist poets, largely based on the Lovesong of J. Alfred Prufrock, and we look at it in terms of being a modernist poem. But as I said in class, and I said just now, it was very hard battle to actually get the poem published. And also, don't forget what we said in class is that it was its original title was Prufrock and the Women. Other things, some critics argue that the poem is biographical, and we've talked about this in class, that perhaps the time to murder and create and the revisions, the indecisions, the visions are all about his creative side and the personal conflicts that he felt in his own life. Some argue that it is the sexual frustration of a man and a reflection of Eliot's own sexual anxieties. Others see it as a poem full of sexual innuendo that is frustrated. There are suggestions that Prufrock has an unhealthy relationship with women. Stanley Salton, another one of the critics that you could possibly read, writes that both decades of commentary on Prufrock and recent emphasis on the apposition of any particular reader to attributed evidence in the verbal composition increasingly disclose cryptic elements in the poem. As a result, once confident and seemingly unassailable assertions have been transformed into a question. So it's the more we discuss it, the more ambiguous it becomes, and the less certain we are of what it actually means. And so what you've got going on here is that the very critics themselves question their perspectives, and their own perspectives mirror the ambiguity and the uncertainty of the poem. Does he actually go to the party? Does he go to the beach? Does he go up the stairs? Does he ask the question? Does he actually go anywhere? What is the question? What is the overwhelming question? And do I dare do what? Do I dare go up the stairs? Do I dare eat a peach? Are they metaphors for something else? Or do we take it literally? Okay, structure in terms of the poem. We've discussed in class it is a dramatic interior monologue. On the surface appears to be incoherent and have disjointed fragments, and the images and references appear quite obscure. Yet the structure itself supports the idea that Prufrock himself is fragmented, disjointed, and problematic, perhaps even incoherent, as he cannot say what he truly means, which is one of the lines in the poems. The title itself is ironic. The name, J. Alfred Prufrock, it creates the idea of a socially awkward character. We've talked about in class how the name is believed to have come from a furniture store in Eliot's hometown. Eliot himself says that he can't remember the story and did not know of the existence of the name. And if that's the case, it can be argued that the name choice is because of the social suggestions that come from it. The poem itself, the rhyming and the structure all lead to that uncertainty that we've talked about in class. Further things, it says, then let us go. The conjunction then, or let us go then. The conjunction then, it links us to the epigraph. So we've talked about it in class. The epigraph is not usually considered part of a poem, and yet the then firmly links it. So the epigraph does form part of this poem, and it becomes a framing device, which is really important when you're talking about structure. So therefore, the life of Prufrock, this man who follows social rituals of teas and parties and pseudo-intellectualism, is in hell. This then makes us, the reader, like Dante, we are in hell here in confession. So how you interpret the you and I sets up the interpretation and perspective of the poem, and we have talked about that in class. So I won't go into that any further, but we've also got the idea of pinning the poem to the wall, just as Prufrock is. Is he in itself part of what gives this poem enduring value? That it can't be pinned to the wall to give the one formulated response. You can't give a formulated response in the HSC. The poem can't have a formulated response because there are so many multiple layers of meaning and perspectives. So that's it. You're going to need to listen to it, take some notes, because you're going to do some writing in Tuesday's lesson. And tomorrow we move on to preludes. Thank you.